spent some time with Amazon and a couple of startups, and also tried my hand at building a startup of my own. And most of the experiences that I'm going to be sharing today are, from either my current or past experiences, or from the startup that I've run. But obviously, also I'm going to talk about examples that are otherwise relevant for the discussion. So, very quickly, just a second. Yep. Okay, so yeah, we're going to spend about 5 minutes to talk about what really an MVP is. We're going to spend some time on how to build the right kind of MVP, and then take about 20 minutes towards the end to take some questions. So a lot of you shared questions while signing up for this webinar, and I took, thank you so much for sharing them firstly. So I had a chance to go through them and found some very recurring patterns within these questions. So I've kind of tried to address some of the frequently asked ones at the end of this presentation itself. And the 20 minutes that you see here are above, beyond those questions. So I think we'll have enough time to do a good Q&A. So I want to quickly begin about what is an MVP. I think there are a lot of definitions that float around, but I'll just, before jumping onto that, share a quick stat. So almost about 50% of all products or new features that you build tend to fail. And why that happens essentially is because people go on and try to build full baked products right from the word go, instead of going through an MVP. And while it's very easy to speak about hey, we should always build an MVP and go about iterating on top of it, and we should be agile, and all those buzzwords sound great, but in the practical world, when you start working on building products on a regular basis, it's very tempting to take the problem head on and build the best solution out there first, and do a grand launch email and so on. And that's the fallacy in which most companies fall, and most product people end up making that error. Everyone makes those errors, including myself, and that's when we build not so successful products. And a quick stat, I mean, more than 40% of startups fail because there was no market need, and no one really built out an MVP or did a set of exercises to ascertain if the market need was there. People just went about building this next big idea that they had, and which is why we are trying to do this session. So what is an MVP? And this is my definition. I'll give a quick walkthrough. I can take a few seconds to read it, but in my opinion, it's the bare minimum amount of product that you need to build with the absolute minimal amount of resources and time to kind of achieve one of the two following things that I've mentioned here, right? You want to test some hypothesis. And mind you, this is not just for startups. Any product that you're building, any incremental feature that you're building, we're talking about the same thing. So you either want to test a fresh hypothesis, or you want an extremely fast time to market when there is no big hypothesis there, but you really need to reach the market first because first mover's advantage. That's when you kind of decide to build an MVP. So just to capture a quick couple of examples, and this is one of my favorite examples, and I've seen this literally this product grow in front of my eyes. Back in 2010-11, when WhatsApp had just released, obviously there were no gimmicky features that I'm talking about here. No emojis, no file sharing, no fancy business. But at the same time, what is most important to notice is they focused on the right things, right? So they focused on having extremely easy discovery for people. Most of you discovered WhatsApp through your friends when they sent you a invite SMS. The onboarding was super fast. You just had to use your phone number. So no fancy business of the predecessors. No Gmail ID or Yahoo ID required. No BB pin required. Very simple, fast onboarding. You just need your phone number. The core value was extremely simple. we want to allow people to do text messages over the internet free of cost. That was a very simple core value that they wanted to present. Uh, of course, they made it super usable. They focused on the usability and the reliability of the tool. Uh, and having said that, what they consciously decided, or why they consciously decided to build these features as opposed to anything else, or even included usability and reliability, is because they were well aware that the market exists. So a lot of chat apps existed before WhatsApp. Internet-based chat apps existed before WhatsApp. So the core value was established. Uh, the business case was there. The market was ready. It's just that the current set of products were not solving for the right customer problems, and that's where they stepped in and kind of tried to address. So the earliest of versions also tried to work on their core hypothesis, and we'll speak more about what your riskiest assumption or your riskiest hypothesis is a little later in the discussion today. Just a couple of more examples. My favorites. Uh, Amazon.com simply started as a website that looked as ugly as what you see on your screen right now. There was, uh, a very plain text looking page, and you could literally uh, scour through a directory of books, and they did only books, by the way. So they focused on doing one thing, which is selling books, and then they did that really well before they started building upon the rest of the e-commerce business. And also Airbnb is another favorite. So just a couple of things that Airbnb decided not to do in their MVP. uh, they said, hey, we're not going to take money from people who book Airbnbs. The transaction has to be a cash transaction at the end of the customer, not even building the complete funnel. That's also something that you might be forced to do when building an MVP. And then I'd like to quickly speak about what's an MLP. So, people keep talking about, hey, MVP is an old time concept. The new thing is MLP, which is minimum lovable product as opposed to minimum viable product. And I agree. In fact, I have a slightly different point of view, which I will arrive at a little later. But what is the core difference between an MVP and an MLP? So while an MVP in the traditional sense tried to focus on building the minimum amount of functionality, an MLP tries to build the minimum amount of product that delivers a core value in the most uh, scaled version, but without actually building it for scale. So taking back the example of WhatsApp, WhatsApp actually focused on not just the core functionality, but also on reliability, on the usability of the product. Uh, it was super important to kind of build for everything in this, in this need pyramid that we see that a product goes through, as opposed to only building a thin part of the functional stack there. However, for the rest of our discussion, I'm going to interchangeably use both MVP and MLP. In my opinion, MVPs were never supposed to be this ugly. They were always supposed to be MLPs. And I think somewhere the terms got misconstrued and people started using two separate terms, but we are going to stick to using the term MVP. So how do you build an MVP? And I think over the next 10-15 minutes, we'll try and discuss not just how to build an MVP, but is your case something that actually requires you to build an MVP? And we'll see why I asked that question. So there are multiple tools available to kind of enter a market, or to start offering value to the customer. MVP is, of course, we discussed, it's the minimum amount of product that you build to test your core hypotheses and so on. There's also something called as proof of concept. And a proof of concept is something that is typically used when it's a small, uh, it's a technical capability or a product feasibility that you do not even know if it exists. So just to give you an example, if you were to kind of build even WhatsApp, you would want to check the product feasibility, or as some may call it, the technical feasibility of sending uh, chat messages over the RPC protocol super fast and seamless as WhatsApp actually wanted to do. So before building, a user interface that can have two parties connect over it. A simple API could have been built just to check whether the message actually goes as fast as it needs to, for the optimal customer experience that they're building for, right? And again, there is the prototype. And prototype is, of course, an exercise that we all end up doing while building products of any size and scale. But uh, what prototypes enable us to do is build something that might not even be a product. It might be the most hackiest way of building something, and then you would want to kind of take it to your customer in the form of a UI mockup, or let's say in the form of a click-through mockup, and then you kind of let your customer play around it, experience what it would be like to build that product. Because hey, building products is extremely costly. uh, you want to fail as fast as possible, and that's what the entire world of MVP and proof of concept is all about. So quickly moving on. Yeah. So in fact, I'll give an example on each of these. So MVP, we spoke obviously about uh, WhatsApp, and we also spoke about a proof of concept on WhatsApp. But let me give you an example from my personal experience. So when I was out building my startup called Being Doc, we were trying to build a content platform for doctors, for medical doctors in India. Uh, we actually did not start out by building a product. We started out by building a newsletter. So a newsletter that had simple news articles or medical research articles from the previous day. And we actually had a medical co-founder who was a doctor. So he actually sat through and selected five of these articles, minified them just like what InShots does to news articles. He actually sat and minified them every day into a small paragraph, and we used to kind of put them together into an email and send it to our customers, which were doctors. And that was our bare minimum product. And the hypothesis that we were trying to prove is, are doctors even interested in learning more about their field? Is it just a matter of them not getting enough time, which is why they are not constantly updated about medical science, and so on? So some of these were our hypotheses, and we started out building a newsletter. So that's a kind of a proof of concept. uh, Another thing obviously is prototype. And prototype, I don't have any specific example, but a lot of times you know uh, when we're trying to build a larger product, and specifically in the B2B segment. And someone actually asked this question: uh, how do you build MVPs for B2B products, where uh, way too much is at stake before building a product, where the complexity of the product itself is high, a lot of prerequisites before you build a product. You build a prototype and you go ahead and test the core hypothesis on the prototype, instead of building all the prerequisite, getting the customer data and so on. Another example from my previous company on what an MVP looks like. uh, Amazon used to do only product pages full of bunch of text. So obviously there was, on top of the page there was an image scroller, but the description of the product was full of text. And then at some point of time they decided to kind of move away from it. They wanted to provide brands to bring in more flavor, or more interactive content. But they did not jump on to what you today see on, let's say, a phone device, wherein you'll get a bunch of videos and uh, GIFs and so on, or interactive tabs, as you can see here. They did not start out with that. What they started out was, let's just allow images and richer text as opposed to non-rich text. So they built the first version of it, and then when the traction on it was amazing. And just to give you a sense, this is a product that has about 20% conversion improvement, which is huge in any industry by any measure. That's when they kind of doubled down on that opportunity and built out a more interactive version of it. So what I'm trying to get at in this particular example is, you really do not know what potential your next big idea, or your customer pain point is capable of solving. Today, A plus, on the right side, what you see is an A plus premium page, which is a paid offering for brands. And Amazon makes very good money every year on that property. So a small problem of customer comprehension of the product got transformed into a revenue making stream for them. So we spoke about three tools, right? MVP, POC, and prototype. And the obvious question comes as to how do I know what tool do I need to use when I'm set out to building a product or just a feature, or I'm about to start up. And this is a very basic framework that I've tried to put together, that I often use in my in my regular decisions as to what do I want to start with for a particular product. So you need to ask, a bunch of questions that I've mentioned on the left hand side. Uh, who's the customer? A lot of times it is very easy to just keep blabbering about who the customer is, but start writing a paragraph about who your customer is, and that's when you'll start finding the most difficult part of building products is actually defining who your customer is. And we'll talk about how to do that a little later on this session. But yeah, I mean, who is your customer? What is the core customer problem? Not the problem that the customer is talking about, but what is the underlying customer problem is what you need to get at. Is the customer problem proven? Is it something that is validated? Uh, or is it a figment of the enthusiast product manager's imagination, which is, by the way, a lot of cases, right? 40% of startups uh, imagine a need and then they build a product as opposed to actually validating if the product actually the problem actually exists. What is the competitive landscape like? Is it a very evolved landscape? There is active competition that is making money on it, or you're a new entrant. How nascent is the technology that you're going to use, or how nascent is the know-how of the technology that you're going to use? um, just to take an example, if and I'm talking about in the payments landscape here, because that's the current problem on which I'm working. But let's say a network like a Visa or Mastercard comes up with the next big way of easing, making online payments. Do I jump on that? Do I actually evaluate the underlying technology? They keep talking about NFC, but is NFC something that is available on everyone's phone? Is NFC something that Android developers can easily, integrate with because the platform provides for the functionality? Some of these would be considerations that I would want to present before I decide whether I want to go on that opportunity or not. Are there too many prerequisites to test the core hypothesis? And again, we'll come to what a core hypothesis is and how to arrive at that. But essentially, it's a process of identifying which are your most important hypotheses, which are the riskiest ones. uh, if there is a hypothesis which, if proved incorrect, can make your entire exercise irrelevant, and that's the hypothesis that you want to test first. But to be able to test that, if you need to build 10 more features, you need to build a sign up, you need to build a share functionality and this and that. Is it really worth it? Is it really going to be an MVP, or is it going to be something else? So you need to become more innovative about how you want to address that problem. And this was my favorite. Can you build something in 2 to 3 weeks? uh, while I say MVPs should take how much ever time they need to actually completely evolve into the right usable product that you can ship to the customer, they don't have to be great products. And don't do anything that you cannot do in 2 to 3 weeks by a one or two developer team at best. Uh, so what I'm trying to do on the right side is bucketize the answers of your questions on the left hand side into what tool should you be using. And I'm actually going to start at the bottom of this table. So if you are not clear on A, B, on C, just don't bother doing anything else. Go back to basics, understand your customer problem better, go talk to your potential customers, try to understand your market better, talk to experts, uh, talk to adjacent, industry experts. If you want to start uh, a restaurant, or rather a food delivery business, and if you know very little about the customer and the problem, why don't you actually go and speak to restaurant owners who are currently sending their people to ship food? Just a very basic example there. Next is if if A, B, C, and D are very clear to you, who's your customer, what's the problem is proven, and the landscape exists, uh, and the technology is absolutely evolved, uh, what do you need to do? Uh, and of course, the prerequisites are too high. Can you quickly build a prototype which is your differentiator value? Now, see, when I'm seeing here, E, that is the technology is evolved, and D, the competition landscape exists, is pretty clear. In such a case, you know there are incumbents. Then what is the differential value that you're going to provide? So when, and I do not know if Swiggy did this, but if I were Swiggy and if I were entering after a bunch of players were already doing food delivery, my question would be, what is the differential value that I'm providing? Is it speed of ordering? Is it speed of delivery? And then I would figure out a creative way of testing, those hypotheses. And the hypothesis there is whether my customers actually care for what I'm trying to provide. Do my customer care beyond, you know uh, getting food faster than 30 minutes? Do my customers care about being able to book very easily? You do not know, and that is something that you need to evaluate. And that's when you actually focus on either a basic mock-up driven prototype, if it's only about the user experience. But if it is about the customer experience in terms of receiving the product on time, you got to get innovative there, and think of another way to prototype this whole thing. uh, Moving on to the POC. So you typically do a POC, like we spoke earlier. If it's a new market and the technology that you're using is extremely nascent, you want to be slightly hacky about what you want to build. So, for example, in my startup, I built a newsletter, which, by the way, a lot of content companies begin at. Or you might just do a simple tech POC, pick up the tech, see what documentation exists, do the end-to-end integration, see if you can send one message from one point to the other or not. Whatever is the core value of the technology, just focus on that. And if your answer falls into the first bucket, then that's when you choose MVP as your tool. So just be on this slide for another 5 seconds and move on. Okay, so quick time check. We have about 15 more minutes before we need to begin the Q&A, the interactive Q&A. So I think we're good on time. So also, the other big mistake that a lot of people do, or especially when you're new to the market, or when you're so engrossed and married to the problem, you end up thinking that, hey, MVP is like this uh, this golden key to enter the nirvana of a mature and stable product. Once my core hypotheses are done, I think I'll be able to go ahead and ship the most beautiful product and move on from there. However, that's not the case. Often it's a very iterative journey. Uh, a lot of times you'll come back to square zero, where you have absolutely no idea of whether your hypothesis is tested or not, whether you will get any success or not, and hence your product is not mature, or your idea rather is not mature. And you keep iterating using a combination of tools, and we'll speak about why a combination of tools. But essentially, you keep iterating until you find success on your riskiest hypothesis, and then kind of uh, build on top of that and test your other most important or riskiest hypothesis, and so on. By the way, I've put sources on all of these slides from where I'm picking some of these concepts. uh, some of these articles are really good. You should spend some time reading them. That'll really help you clear your understanding of MVP a lot more. The next step that I would do typically is not begin with building a product. So I know that I have a problem, and I want to solve it, and I'm very enthusiastic about it. But and I've spoken about, oh, you should pick a tool and this and that. But hey, before any of this, I think what you need to really do is spend some time writing some things down. And this is something that I picked from Amazon. Uh, until you actually sit down and try to write about problems, you understand very little about them. About problems, about ideas, about your customer, about anything. So I would really recommend you writing and uh, Some might say, oh, you're talking about speed and you're talking about writing, boring, long process. I would say spending 2 hours of writing will save you uh, days of writing unnecessary code, or spending hundreds of dollars on trying to shove an inferior product over, uh, you know, through ads on Facebook and Google. So I'd really much rather focus on the writing part, and write for yourself. You don't have to essentially write to show the documentation to someone else. You don't have to think that writing is only required because documentation, process, etc. Write your ideas down for your own clarity of thought. So I would typically begin at elucidating the problem, kind of, building, or rather, creating a structure to it. I'd begin with defining who's my customer, uh, and as easy as it might sound, once you try to kind of write about it, it becomes more and more difficult. So to take a small example, when I was doing my startup, my first customer statement was, "This product is for doctors, Indian doctors." And then when I started thinking, will a 55-year-old Indian family physician sitting in tier two town care about my product? I realized probably not. Uh, and that's when you kind of start thinking in terms of customer personas. What are the various customer personas that would be actually interested in your product? Which in my case were recent college graduates who are right out of college as doctors, and would continue to have the hunger of learning more about medical research, or doctors who are going to prepare for their masters or for super specialty. They are the kind of people who are always interested in the new tech, or the new research that is coming out. So define these various personas. Not just that, kind of try to size each of the personas. Market sizing, or uh, just guesstimation, is an activity anyone trying to build a product would essentially need to do. So try to size each of these personas, and then pick just one persona. Don't focus on all of those personas, because when you start thinking about the other personas, you start having complementary problem ideas, and you'll kind of get bogged down on them. So just pick that one persona that is the biggest persona for your problem, and kind of go deeper into that persona, and redefine the problem for them. So when you try to redefine the problem, saying, I'd like to build a product that enables recent or recent graduate of medical college to continuously keep learning about latest medical research uh, in an easy manner, without using too many gadgets, without subscribing to medical journals. That's a more specific problem, and that's something that gets evolved over time. So make sure, at the end of the customer definition, you kind of redefine the customer problem as well. Triangulate, or rather validate your problem using all the available information, and triangulate using multiple information. So you'll do a survey of certain doctors, and you'll hear something. And this happened with me a lot, by the way. I go to a tier 2 towns medical college and I hear a few things. I go to a metro city medical college and I hear other things. um, so you need to kind of meet a few hundred people before you can form a very good opinion. uh, some you will meet over surveys, some you will meet over one-to-one meetings, some will be pure observations, and you kind of try to triangulate the data that you get from these various sources, and uh, clearly understand what you really know about these people, which are your customers, and what is it that is a complete hypothesis for you or an assumption for you. Once that is done, I think you need to build in the process of carving out hypothesis, and list down what all is an assumption for you. I think each assumption is essentially a hypothesis. Uh, which of them are pure gut feels, because a lot of them will be pure gut feels, right? My imagination that, or my gut feel that the recent graduate doctors would be the most tech savvy was proven wrong. A lot of them were still very bookish, did not like using the phone like some engineers or product people would like doing on in terms of quantum of time per day and so on. So a lot of your hypothesis would be pure gut feels and will get uh, invalidated. Uh, which hypotheses are the most riskiest? Basically, something I spoke about earlier. If this hypothesis proves incorrect, my business breaks. And that hypothesis for me was doctors are interested in constantly learning about medical research. If that hypothesis breaks, there's no point of me attempting to do that business, right? So the problem itself is an hypothesis, and a lot of times we tend to think problems are so clear and evident that we do not have to validate them as hypotheses, but they continue to be hypotheses until you actually find product market fit. And hey, 40% of startups never find product market fit. So yeah, once you've identified your riskiest hypothesis, I think you need to use the framework that I shared here and kind of pick one of the tools between these three if you feel you do not know enough about the problem. Back to basics. So moving on. So yeah, the essence of this slide is, don't think in terms of, hey, I want to build an MVP. Think in terms of, how much do I know? What tool do I need to use? And then how do I get from there to building a real product? Uh, Now, once, based on the tool, you arrive at, hey, I need to build an MVP, or uh, as I would suggest, even if the tool suggests build an MVP, kind of stick to building a prototype, and it will also manifest in this process I've listed here. Uh, Try to do prototyping more. Uh, Build something on paper, build something on build a hacky way of doing something, and then kind of take it to solutioning. I'll in fact talk about another example that I tried when I was doing my startup. So I was out there outside of hospitals, visiting people, overhearing patient conversations and this and that. When I had this epiphany, uh, people who are expected to undergo surgery tend to take a second opinion. And I thought, wow, that's a great business. I'll offer second opinions to people from doctors that do not know them, so that they will be getting, unbiased second opinion. Because second opinion, again, my hypothesis was, often tends to be very biased, because, hey, that doctor is bad. Maybe you should get the surgery done from me, right? So these were some of my hypotheses, and uh, the way I tried to hack this problem, or rather prototype this problem, so to say, was I just built an Excel sheet of a process that I would follow to simply do everything that I spoke about, a remote second opinion of um, through a doctor that the patient does not know in another city, so that there is no motivation whatsoever to lure the customer or lure the patient. Build that process, tried it for 10 patients who were looking for a second opinion. Uh, Turns out people don't need second opinion from doctors who they cannot see, who they cannot speak with. Turns out doctors do not want to be involved in providing second opinion only basis medical history or test documents. They want to actually see the customer. They actually want to ask more questions, and that's something that does not work over the remote model that I had imagined. So prototypes will have to be really creative. They have to be very contextual. Prototypes are often hacks to not build any product whatsoever. This, what I did was, by building zero product, zero lines of code. So that's something that I'm getting at. And I think if I had any success at that, is when I would have started to build an MVP, which is where I'd come back and try to redefine the customer problem once again. Because between the initial exercise and now, I've learned a lot more about my customer basis the activities of the tool. And that's where I've want to incorporate the new learnings into the customer problem statement. uh, Again, define your key hypothesis, but not just that, it's very important to define your success criteria. A lot of times it's very easy to say, I have a hypothesis, I will test it. And then you test it out, and then you get um, one or two customers who are actually interested in your product, and you are like, oh, my hypothesis is correct, and I'm going to build a product out of it, and I'm going to make $1 billion out of this. Do not do that. Define a success criteria, and be very practical about it. It's the most difficult thing to do, but it's the most important thing to do as well. So set a very high bar of what success means. It could be a product market fit success. It could be success in terms of the impact that it provides. Just to take an example, anything that you see on both Amazon and Flipkart websites have to go through an A/B test, and each release has to be an experiment that the customer see has to be an experiment. And before doing those experiments, we have to define success criteria. Now, success criteria cannot be we will increase sales. Oh, the a lot of things you'll do will increase sales, but it will just bloat your software. It will just make your software more and more complex. There will be a downstream impact of building such software in terms of engineering slowness, in terms of you know uh, customers actually increasingly getting confused with so many features to use. So don't focus only on, hey, this will improve uh, a metric, but it will improve a metric at least by so much. So put that high bar for yourself. When you're launching this, jazzy new feature, tell yourself, oh, I'm going to build a feature, and basis my estimation is going to uh, increase the GMV, let's say, or sale by at least 1% or 0.5%. 1% might be a huge number in certain cases. So let's say 0.5%, but stick to that bar. If you do not do that, you will go ahead and build products which will look successful today, but will eventually turn out to be not so successful products, which mass customers will not end up using, or most of your customers rather will not end up using. The next thing would be to define flows and create mocks for the offering or for the product that you're building. A general rule here would be to strip off all the developmental complexity. So again, I'm going to take an example from payments. If I was building the first payments page for my startup to accept payments from customers, I would not bother building, oh, the OTP should be auto-read by the app. I don't care actually. The customer really loves my product. They will enter the OTP manually and they will continue to like it despite that. Uh, that's a development complexity that I do not want to involve. Is it difficult? Is it lack of tech know-how? No, it's absolutely simple. I can take an SDK from someone and integrate it. Does it take time? Yes, and I do not want to do that. In fact, let some of the complexity lie on the user side. It's okay. If your customers use your product and you meet your success criteria despite the user complexity, that's when you know that you're building the right product, right? Prototype and test we have already spoken about. You'll get a lot of chance to kind of incorporate the feedback. uh, Ground rule, try to implement something in 2 to 3 weeks at best. Don't forget the testing plan. Don't forget testing the product before you're bringing it out to the customer. And when you actually test your product with your customers, fix a time frame for the experiment. Do not let it be like uh, a 3-day experiment, a 5-day experiment. Let it run for a while, 7 days at minimum. Make sure you are sticking true to the metrics that you have defined, and scale only if you are achieving your success criteria. Very quickly, I'll take 2 minutes to go through a couple of slides, and then I think we'll move to questions. A few learnings that I've collected over the year. Nothing too great, but hopefully they'll be useful to you. Let your engineering team take extremely inferior decisions to enable superior speed. Do not build for scale. It might not come at all. You don't have to write code that lasts for years. Once you have an MVP done, try and move out of that. You will always have the time to rewrite your code and so on. Don't cut corners on reliability. It's expected to not work 100% time or 99.99% time, but at least 80% time your product should just work. Do not cut corners on UX and copy. UX is user experience. It's got nothing to do with how beautiful your product looks. Let it look extremely crappy. That's okay. It should just be enough for the customer to be able to use it. I know it's a slight contradiction from the point I placed in the previous slide, which is, optimize for development speed. I would still say that, but between development speed and UX, focus on development speed. Copy is basically the messaging that you put on your product everywhere, and uh, you have a chance to impress your customers even very early on. When you have the deck, take a chance to go back to the Amazon page, and you'll see some very heart-to-heart connecting text in the first version of Amazon.com. That's what I'm talking about. You need to connect with the customers very early on. Think go-to-market backwards. Please do not think only features. A lot of time you tend to get used to tend to get bogged down by, oh, I'm going to build this. As opposed to that, try thinking of, I'm going to build this, which the customer is going to discover like this and would want to use it because in this context, it is important to them. Think more go to market first, is all I'm trying to say there. Uh, when trying to build a product, between first principles thinking and copying what exists in the market, obviously it depends on, a couple of factors. You should copy when the market offering and timing is, very successful, incumbents are doing it. Feel free to copy. Everyone does that. Copying is not bad. uh, what is bad is not having a market to operate in. First principles is great when you know that a market exists, uh, but the offering that are available in the market today might not be the most optimal, and you're trying to kind of uh, rework towards that. So I think that's what I mean there. Uh, do not write too much specs as product people when you're trying to build an MVP. Focus on what would be acceptance criteria. What if the product does is good enough. Don't focus on writing, oh, edge cases and this and that. Don't invest your time in that. And just a quick note, do not forget to spend resources on instrumentation and A/B tools very early on in the process. uh, we're moving to Q&A. I think I'm 5 minutes over time, but going to quickly cover some frequently asked questions, and then the remaining question I think we can ask at the end of it. How minimal should the product be? So it should be just enough to test your risk case hypothesis. Uh, Also, your GTM should, your time to market essentially should be fast enough to get there first. Losing out on first mover advantage in certain uh, product categories can be fateful for your business. Okay. What is the product core functionality requires? Too many prerequisites. I think firstly, don't think in terms of functionalities. Obviously, if possible, prototype. Uh, Even beyond that, if you really have to build functionalities, and it happens in, uh, you know, uh, B2B products, and I've worked on one in the past. What you really need to do, or rather, what happens is the buyer and the user are different people. The buyer thinks in terms of functionalities, they think in terms of checklists, and to be able to win that account, you need to fill that checklist, uh, build the stripped down version of a product. So you should be able to strip it down to that extent that, uh, let's say, you should be able to create a message. Now that message should not even require a rich text message. Maybe it's the ideal use case, but you don't have to get into the philosophical line right now. You have to win that account, and which is why I would ask you to just stick to building the leanest version of it. No rich text editor, no emojis, nothing, right? How do you inspire team members involved in building MVP? And yeah, I mean, some of the things that I would focus on is uh, writing an extremely compelling vision for the team. It's again an activity that you'll have to write down. Show them what you are intending to build overall. Obviously, that will change and it will evolve. But it's always a good practice to show them the larger picture. Uh, Show them adjacencies, right? So if not your market, show them similar things in adjacent markets. I think that's also something that tends to inspire teams. Again, it's a very difficult one. It's very subjective to the maturity of the team that you're working with. Uh, what's also important is that you re-emphasize the vision that you're talking about at a regular interval. Um, and make sure that your team gets to work on what they're supposed to work on. So if you're talking about engineering team, they should not have unnecessary issues to not be able to work on the engineering problem that they would like to work on, right? So I think, yeah, that's what you would want to focus on. How much time should it take to build an MVP? General rule: take as much as it likes, uh, but lesser is better, obviously. In the post product market fit companies, I think 3 to 6 weeks for a first version is still fine. But if you're in pre-product market fit, don't even bother beyond 2 to 3 weeks. Just restrict yourself to that time, and start building that product out. How to make feature and quality trade-offs? So ask yourself, does it help to test the risk case hypothesis building that feature? If no, chuck it. Does it help communicate the core value of your product? If not, again, dump it. Will the absence of this make my customer not like the product? If the answer is no, again, just dump it. And I know some of these are like judgment calls, but these are the judgment calls that you need to keep making as product managers anyway. Okay, so I think I'm done with the Q&As I had, and we can take some questions now. Piyush?
Hi, Gaurav.
Hi.
Before anybody jumps in for the Q&A, I just thought I'll quickly peep in and say thank you so much for the session.
Okay.
MVP has been a constant hit in terms of the number of people who want to inquire about MVPs and what is an MVP and when do I know I have an MVP and so on and so forth. I think what you've covered is fantastic. I think that should give you, especially with examples about doctors and how you navigated the entire pathway during your previous startup. I think that should be a good food for thought for a lot of people. Once again, thank you so much for showing up. And to everyone, please be precise about your questions. That way, you'll get a better answer than asking a little vaguer question. I'll open up the field to Piyush to navigate and ask the questions.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Purvi Chaudhary. So suppose if I asked in the chat box also, if I'm having a healthcare app, like you talked that you're working on a healthcare product. If there's a lifelong condition like diabetes, and I'm not sure if people want to have a menu of food items where I'm detailing about diet. I mean, diet consulting, I'm giving it like a menu in our app. I'm not sure if people even want it. So what should be my approach? I should talk to only customers, I mean the patients, or I should also take a survey from the doctors also, dietitians also. What should be my approach?
Okay, so very interesting question, and also a line of business that I explored before finally calling it quits for my startup. But have you tried actually talking to enough customers is the key point there. If your customers say that, hey, as a diabetic person, I really face this problem of not knowing what to eat and not knowing, what if eaten in so much quantity uh, might be harmful for me. If they are actually worried about it constantly, then that's, good enough quick for you to kind of, jump deeper into it. Again, I would request you to kind of slice the market. So you have diabetic patients both in the vegetarian and non-vegetarian spectrum. You have, of course, in metro cities and non-metro cities. So various ways to kind of slice and dice the market itself. Pick one of those personas. Again, within those would be, age groups and people who are going to office or not. And some of these, lifestyle defines food habits, right? So some of these would define which customer persona you actually need to target to begin with. And then think a little innovatively. What could your prototype look like here? Can you send them, 10 people emails about what they should be eating or not for, let's say, a month? And would that be helpful to them? Would they actually care about opening that email? You'll be surprised to know how poor email open rates are. So some of these are like the rather easy ways of hacking through that problem, is what I would suggest.
So you
Yeah,
can
of course.
first use other mediums like email to check their response, and then
Email
think about
today, WhatsApp.
incorporating. Yeah.
Today you could use WhatsApp, right? I mean,
Yeah. So maybe we can try other channels and check their response, and then we can think that, okay, can we incorporate, or we should not ask them directly, shall we, do you need it or
you
not?
can of course ask them directly, and I think the only problem there is when you ask people if they want something, they will say they want something, uh, and there is no way they will be able to tell you that they will put their money where their needs are. Human beings are
If it's free,
extremely
if it's a free
irrational.
feature in our app.
Sure, it's free for the customer to buy, but would they continue to care about it? It's not just money which they are paying, right? They're also paying in terms of time, attention. What are they going to do with that information? Some of these are more important questions before you even start writing a line of code.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, done that, coach the teams, they can start with,
Survi, I'm not able to hear you clearly.
So can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, that was better.
Yeah, so I'm a PM practice lead and I basically take care of the teams in my company Dell that how they can start opting the lean startup way of product management. So very often, since I'm working in a company which is into the enterprise and they have a big legacy product, like they have acquired EMC and all, right? So often the people come and ask, "Hey Surbhi, definitely we are working in a lean startup way. We want to work in that, but how to run experiment in the B2B sort of environment where the products are so large and we have a different persona associated with it." So we designed couple of experiment for some of the products, like as Airbnb example, like people will like your product. We have done our validation test and all, but it takes a lot of time.
Sure. So let me
So
try and answer that.
yeah,
I think if you're trying to ask what is the most innovative way of knowing if
yeah,
your customers will care in a B2B environment,
yeah,
I think it's telling them the cost of the additional amount that they'll have to pay for that feature.
yeah.
If enough customers are agreeing, I think you have product market fit. I would suggest take the money, then build the product. That's what all B2B companies do.
Mhm. Okay.
Right? And then you build the MVP, then you build the leanest product to kind of
Mhm.
ship the core value that you promised to your customer as soon as possible, and then kind of keep iterating to increase the value, improve the experience, and so on.
Okay. So
Um,
during the iteration, we can do the experiments also, right? When I'm iterating it based on
every
their
every
feedback.
iteration is an experiment.
Okay. Okay.
Hi Gaurav, this is Anurag here.
Hi, Anurag.
Your session was very intuitive and had a great value.
So okay. So is it being done in the when in a
I'm
particular
sorry,
sprint?
repeating Anurag's question right now.
Yep. So my question is, in B2B scenario,
Mhm.
uh, when
Yeah,
we
this
have
answers to my
yeah,
question.
Yeah, Anurag, go ahead.
so in a B2B scenario, when you have multiple competitors already available with many features
Mhm.
already available in the market,
Mhm.
and we are doing some innovation as a startup,
Mhm.
what we should consider as a MVP, or where while developing a new product to the into that competition,
Mhm.
to what extent I should consider my product to be stopped at MVP stage
Mhm.
and start taking a feedback, because
Sure.
for in a open market there are already many competitors available,
Yeah.
but yes, we have to
Yeah,
be
I think prototyping is the best tool for you in that case. If you're trying to do something innovative, and this innovation could be in terms of the customer experience, it
Mhm,
could be in terms of the speed at which the product operates. I'm not sure of the context that you're operating in or the business that you're operating in,
mhm,
but these are some of the key considerations that business buyers have. In which case, uh, before even building the MVP, and again, we spoke about the case where there are a ton of prerequisites, right? So
mhm,
how can you short circuit your path to knowing product market fit? That has to be a prototype where you build that core value. So that core value could be a user experience. That core value could be a speed of operation,
mhm,
and you sign up a few customers for lesser price or for no price,
mhm.
and try to provide them just that value. So
Okay, okay.
just a very vague example, if you're saying, hey, I have a uh, I have an ERP software or
Mhm,
other financial software that does amazing reconciliations in, let's say, half of the time that competition is able to provide, but I don't have the time to build those 100 other features that my competition offers. Go to 5 customers, tell them, hey, I'm going to provide you great reconciliation. All you have to do is dump in some data with me. I will take care of the obvious, the security of your data and so on. I will provide it to you in half the time. Do it at your system, whatever whatever mechanism or innovation that you have at your end. uh,
mhm.
Employ that mechanism, build that value, provide it back to the customer. Short circuit the non-essential bits for the customer to see value. uh, when you do that, customers will not just invest money in terms of uh, paying for it, but they will also invest time in terms of telling you what else to build, what else is more important.
Okay.
And often it happens that you might realize that
Mm-hmm.
there are so many other problems in that same business function in which you're operating in the B2B space, where no one's really present to provide a good solution or a comprehensive solution, and you would open yourself to a new market altogether. So I think both pieces, short circuiting the experience part, as
Mm-hmm.
well as having building a deeper relationship with your customer, will provide you these two benefits. And again, uh, as long as possible, do not do anything for free. I mean, even if you have some innovation, it costs you. It might be just a backend set of APIs, or it might just be some cloud computing
Mm-hmm.
costs. There are costs, and try not to throw away money for free.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Gaurav. And it was a nice explanation what I was looking for. Thank
Hey
you.
Gaurav,
I
Vishal.
think
Hello.
we do a couple of more questions.
Hey
Hello.
Gaurav, Vishal here.
Hi, Vishal.
Yeah, I'm a product manager with Origo. I'm working on to roll out of features for B2B SaaS-based product into the market.
Mhm,
Just in continuation to your previous explanation,
mhm.
so don't you think all that makes sense when we have asked the customer the data, and that too from the existing customers, to test your hypothesis?
Mhm.
Because it will be difficult when you pitch into a new customer and ask for data for a solution which you are not able to prototype them.
Sure. So you don't have to ask for the complete data. Again, you'll have to continue to be innovative with how you prototype. Again, I do not know your context again, but uh, with respect to why would customer invest in sharing their confidential data with me? Ask them to
Exactly.
share minimal data. Ask them to share masked data. So where you cannot identify anything of that data. Ask them to share just 10 or 20 records, and provide value. In fact, I have a good example. uh, uh, in Craftsvilla, we were trying to do some feature extraction from the text descriptions that we had, and we employed this company called Squad Run to kind of extract those features, and they had this very comprehensive system to do that. And how they got innovative with providing a solution to us is they said, hey, can you just dump your catalog to us on an Excel file, give us only 500 records, and we'll get back to you. We'll show you what is the quality of output that we can provide you. And if that suits you, that's when you kind of employ us to scale it for the rest of your catalog. And only because that activity was an extremely low friction activity for me as a customer to indulge in is when I experimented. Otherwise, I had a very different uh, uh, proposition for my company to address that problem. So two things worked, right? I mean, they spoke to me in great detail and tried to understand my problem, my reservations. And once my reservations were clear, I think they were able to provide me an innovative way of addressing that friction point.
The reason why I have asked this is because in my gamut or my industry, the sales of my product goes through the word of mouth by the existing customers. And it becomes sometimes difficult to pitch into a new customer and ask for data. You're right in that point. We had done that. We have got the data from the existing customers. We also roll out a ERP kind of tool, and we were working
Okay.
on to simulate a project management solution for them. But
Mhm.
all we could do was from the existing customers. We could test the hypothesis, and when we rolled out to the new customers, it was somehow failing. So
Mhm.
why it is failing anyway, it's a different discussion. I can take it offline. But anyways, your point taken. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hi, Vishal. Tell me.
So, Gaurav, how important it is to quantify user stories in a PRD while building a product?
Okay. So if you're uh, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think it would be at 7. So you want to have a very good sense of what is the impact size or the customer size. You don't want to get to the nth level detail there unless it's critical for the nature of the industry. Uh, I hope I'm able to answer that question. I mean, my gut feel is that it's 1 to 7. Different PMs might talk differently about it, but I think it gives you a good sense of whether you should go ahead with that problem or not.
Okay, fine.
I think we can take one last question, then end session if we have anything. Okay, great.
So there is one last question in
Okay.
chat section.
Okay. Will you be reading out the question to me?
Yeah, so Shom is asking if there are any opportunities available at Flipkart. So, what's the
Yeah, you
good
can always
method?
visit flipkartcareers.com and feel free to apply to any of those roles. Uh, if you feel that I should refer you, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to refer you across. Never an issue.
So thanks a lot, Gaurav, for taking out time and conducting a session for pragmatic leaders. I'm sure everyone would have some concrete takeaways from this session, and we would love to have you once again.
No problem. Glad to be here. Thank you so much for being a great audience and bringing out some good questions both at the sign up stage and now towards the end of the session. So that made me really think hard about uh, the takeaways that I would be able to provide in the session. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. Very simple and informative but comprehensive session. Truly appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So guys, we'll be publishing a video of this session at our YouTube channel. I have shared link of our YouTube channel and a link to join our Slack community in the chat section. You can go there and join us.